If you're looking at a sales situation, you're either living in the present or the future. The only thing you want to look back on in the past is your wins. And the only reason you want to look back at those is that you're in a position to change your state before you're ready to make the next pitch. Be an expert in acting. But if you're not an influencer who can get on with other people, you can be brilliant at what you do. You can be the best. I mean, short of just being a brain surgeon where I have to talk to you, right? There's other people I can talk to that I like and I will listen to. If you're not someone I can relate to, the best thing you can do is learn to ask questions. Questions are fundamental to success in sales. There is an old salesman's prayer, and there's a reason for it. It says, "Oh Lord, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Please help me to use them in that ratio." Right.
My guest for this episode is Sean Weafer. Sean is an internationally renowned sales and leadership coach, a sought-after conference speaker, and the founder of the Sellingis.Life sales enablement app. The author of The Highly Trusted Advisor and Cash Coaching as a Side Hustle, he's worked with some of the giants like Microsoft, DLA Piper and Indeed.com, but is equally at home coaching micro, small and medium-sized clients across a diverse range of industries. When I speak to other speakers about who to follow in the world of sales, Sean's name has come up time and time again, so I'm delighted to have him on the show to share his insight. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment, and subscribe. It will mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Sean, welcome to the show. My first question for you. In life, what's the most important thing you've ever had to pitch for?
My wife, I think, was probably the most important thing I had to pitch for. I'm married 27 years now, so clearly I did a pretty good job of that one, I think. Yeah.
And from a business perspective, when you think of the kind of highs and lows of your career, what do you think is the seminal pitching conversation?
Well, I think in terms of a pitch, I think probably the most important pitch I ever did, which was actually an unpaid pitch, was when I closed the Global Speaker Summit in Vancouver about 10, 11 years ago. The Global Speaker Summit is something that happens every couple of years. It brings professional speakers from all over the globe together. And there was 450 of them in this auditorium. And I'm the closing keynote speaker. Now, I don't know whether you recognize how important that is. As a speaker, you do, obviously, yourself, right? But what's important here is that you're the last one between them and the bar after 3 days of them listening to other speakers. And of course, they're all looking at you going, well, how come he's got that gig and I didn't get to do that gig? So whether it was important or whether it was the most frightening, it's probably a mix of both. I certainly didn't sleep beforehand. And you know, I'm sure you, as I always talk about, when we talk about presenting and speaking, we talk about the importance of rehearsal. So I couldn't sleep the night before. I mean, literally, I was absolutely on edge for 24 hours beforehand. And of course, you do what any professional does, you rehearse. So I rehearsed the entire night. And the poor so-and-so next door could have delivered the speech the following day. You probably heard it so often. You know, it subconsciously was embedded in me. But thankfully, it went well. So I was happy with that. So
I can feel that stress. I've closed the PSA UK conference for the Professional Speaking Association in the UK, and I think that's probably the most stressful gig I've ever done, because you're under scrutiny from fellow professionals in a way that you're not really when you're speaking to the kind of corporate world.
I've made stage for PSA about 3 or 4 times already, so I completely sympathize with you know, because you're dealing with peers. Yeah. And when you're dealing with peers, it's so much more challenging than for a paid audience in many respects, you know.
Yeah, and I think there's a parallel there if you think about the kind of sales environment, that actually, you know, having internal conversations for most people, some people, you know, will say different, but for most people, actually, like pitching something to your boss is almost more difficult than pitching something to people that you've never met before, because there's that level of kind of anonymity there, I suppose. Well,
yeah, exactly, and there's kind of a relationship there that you have with him or them that you don't have necessarily with a prospect that is only just engaged with you and is only just building the relationship with you and hasn't made, well, they do have some prejudgments or stereotypical sentiments about you if you're a salesperson, right or wrong. But it's definitely different. In fact, in fact, funny enough, it's interesting you mentioned that. But for me, I train leaders as well as sales teams. But I focus probably very similar to yourself, Dominic, on communications. I talk about the three pillars of sales or leadership, which are empathy, engagement, and influence. Right.
Right.
And sales and leadership are effectively the same thing. They're just contextualized differently.
Yeah.
So in sales, I'm looking to engage external stakeholders to get them to spend money with me. And then as a leader, I need to engage internal stakeholders to execute what needs to be done to get the money the external guys have just gotten for us. So it's the same communications. It's the same. It's just contextualized differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
we're always selling.
Yeah, always selling. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the Global Speakers Federation was the kind of big one, if you think back through the pitches that you've done, is there one that you think, oh, I'd really love to have seen what happened if they'd said yes? Because we all get no's. So is there anything that you think, oh, I'd love to have walked down that path and explored it a bit more?
Funny enough, I guess I'm an engineer by training, so I tend to be a bit black and white about things. If I don't get the pitch, I say, thank you very much. Let's talk again in a year's time. And I put it out of my mind and get on with it.
Nice.
I don't dwell over it. I might say, you know what, I really should have done that. But I don't see any point to dwelling on the issue. If you're looking at a sales situation, you're either living in the present or the future. Mm-hmm. The only thing you want to look back on in the past is your wins. And the only reason you want to look back at those is that you're in a position to change your state before you're ready to make the next pitch. Because, your pitch, your emotional state is so critical how successful you're going to be in that pitch, because it has a direct impact on the audience even before you open, your mouth to speak. So I find, when I look at it and see, could I analyze it? Is there something I did wrong? Maybe I didn't engage as effectively. Could I improve that? Definitely look at that. But do I worry about getting the business or not? Not really. My attitude is they chose to go somewhere else. That's their choice. Good luck with that. I've got to go now find other people to replace them or just to continue. So I'm very much a forward moving kind of person. So I'm operating now to get to where I need to be in the future.
Brilliant. You are an internationally renowned sales and leadership coach. You're a best-selling author. You're a sought-after conference speaker. But what's your story as a kid? Like, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I guess what I wanted to be was, I was a kid with a great sense of adventure, so I used to get a lot into trouble. So I kind of had very strong concepts around hierarchy as well. So for me, it was ultimately going to be something, in the forces or, some sort of military career, officer career, or something like that. As it ended up, I went to sea as a merchant naval officer.
Oh, wow.
I didn't go into, in Ireland, Ensigns was really, really small. But I ended up going to sea as a merchant naval officer, specifically as an engineer. So I studied for 3 years to do engineering and then went to sea for a couple of years as a merchant navy officer on tankers and super tankers. So these massive ships that pretty much never see sight of land, really. You're at sea for a good 3-6 month period at a time,
Do you remember the interview process for that? Because that must have been an important pitch, getting stepping into that world for the first time is very different from Civvy Street.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I think it's important to understand that when you talk about the merchant navy, it's not the military, but it's not a pure civilian type environment either. Yeah. Right. There's a hierarchy. There's a ship's captain, a master, there's a chief engineer. There's a very strict hierarchy in terms of how it's done. So there was an element of that. As I recall, you did an interview first. Then they brought you to London. I went to London for the interview. They had a bunch of other guys that were looking at. And, you look back at it afterwards and you see what they were doing. They took you to dinner, for example. So they're watching your dinner, how you work with the staff and all that. So you realize this later. Of course, you're 17, 18 years old. You haven't a clue this is going on, right? Then they put you through a full medical. It was it was like a really intense medical. Then they stuck us in a survival program in Portsmouth. I think it was Portsmouth or Plymouth, somewhere down there where the British Royal Marines are based. And they stuck us through this sort of, these intelligence tests. You do intelligence tests and you do various tests, like, how do you get a rope across a chasm and without falling in the water and all that sort of stuff. And then I remember one thing, they made us do this Royal Marine obstacle course. And so we did the obstacle course. And at the end of it, we had to jump off this really high platform into a pool.
Yeah.
Whatever called courage jump or whatever it was, right? And there must have been 20 of us on this. And there's probably 3 or 4 Irish guys. I just remember this. It was so clear. So we're all lining up and we're looking at this huge jump and we sort of talking themselves up to go and do the jump. And then you go and you do the jump and you go in and you hit the water and you go, let's do that again. That was great. So it's just, I don't know whether it's stereotypical or not, but it was only the mad Irish guys who were saying, let's do that again. It was fun. So it was pretty rigorous. I mean, medically, it was rigorous. Physically, it was rigorous. And intellectually, it was rigorous as well. There was a lot of contextual-based interviews that went with that. And separately again, then because I went to college to do engineering as part of my program, there was obviously an aptitude test around your capability to do engineering. And then you had to get certain results in your final exams and all that sort of stuff. But it was pretty rigorous. In fact, I think it was the most rigorous process I ever went through for any job, really,
Fascinating. And in terms of that kind of career in the Merchant Navy and that engineering background, how has that played into, your ability to understand the sales process, understand leadership communication? What did you learn on that ship that you take forward with you to today?
Well, I think the importance of personal relationships, being able to get on with people is critical, particularly in a closed environment of a ship. Typically, you might have sort of 15 to 20 British/Irish officers on a ship. And then you'd have maybe a Goanese crew or an Indian crew. Being able to communicate with people across different cultures, even, obviously back then it was the early 80s for me. So there was a lot of trouble going on in the Northern Ireland. There was conflict was happening, war was going on, all that stuff was happening. So there was some tensions between British and Irish. There were tensions between the Goanese and being able to just get along with people was such a critical, and being able to take people as you found them. Being willing to open up, being willing to engage with people, to be able to work with people. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing. That and the other issue was I would not say I was a natural engineer. I originally wanted to go as a navigation officer, but I'd short-sightedness, so I had glasses. So at the time you couldn't go if you wore glasses. So I figured, what's the next best way to go? And the next best way to go was as an engineering officer, right? And my father said to me, I've never understood how you did that. Prior to deciding that you wanted to become an engineer at sea, you wouldn't even fix a puncture on your own bicycle. but I was determined I was going to see if this was the only way I was going to do it. I was going, because it was like a what do you call it? It's it was sponsored, right? So there was only so many places about. Like you had 2,000 applicants and 20 people could get into this thing, into this college to do engineering. So it was pretty intense to get into it. So I'm not a natural engineer, but being trained as an engineer was hugely helpful. For example, when I was asked to do my first sales training, so I went into the IT industry when I came out of the sea. I was there for 10 years. Another company asked me to come and train their sales team. And I said, I've never trained anyone in my life. I have no idea how to do it. They said, no. Just teach them how you sell, right? And I went, how do I sell? So having trained as an engineer, I just did my flow charts, if this, then that, and blah, blah, blah. And I did a half-day training the sales team, and I got such a buzz out of it that a year later I set up my own sales training company, sales and leadership training company. So the engineering has always helped me ever since. So I designed my own coaching system along with Dr. Dennis Waitley, who you might be familiar with. Dennis was a mentor of mine for a number of years in 1997. And it's very practical, very accountable, very systemic, very measured. So you know exactly where you are all the way through the whole process. So that invariably you always make your goals happen, always. And you know exactly where you are and the whole process is there. And I put all of that down to being trained as an engineer, working as an engineer, paying attention both to strategic planning and tactical planning to make sure that everything works. Because the last thing you want is a super tanker drifting at sea, right? Because the engineers didn't know what they were doing at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that correlates into that area. And actually, a lot of my work is working with people who are not naturally salespeople themselves. So they have to sell. They mightn't even like the concept of selling. So you're dealing with lawyers, you're dealing with accountants, architects, engineers, experts. I call them experts who need to become influencers.
Yeah.
And that idea of being personable, not just professional, is a key element of that. This movement from being an expert to being an influencer, and kind of helping them understand that selling is something, you know, you do every day. You know, if you ever asked your parents, or if you ever successfully got your parents to let you stay up late past your bedtime, well, that was a sale, right?
Yeah.
If you were ever able to get a date, that was a sale. You know, these are all, because what you did was you had an exchange of value for a mutually beneficial outcome. You know, and that's what selling is. It's about service. It's about finding a way to add value to someone, and then on the basis of that, they're willing to add value to you. It's a reciprocative process. It's a synergistic process in terms of what it does. So all of that engineering helped me to put all that sort of stuff in place. And they like the fact, so I take very complex concepts in communication. Later on, I trained as a psychotherapist, clinical hypnotherapist, master of NLP, did all that sort of stuff as well. But I think what a lot of people who are experts appreciate when it comes to teaching them how to sell or how to lead or even how to communicate is the fact that very complex processes can be broken down into simple steps.
Yeah.
So there's 7 steps to how you build rapport with somebody. You know, there are very specific types of questions. They have this particular outcome. If you ask this question, this result will happen. If you use this kind of language, this result will happen. So they appreciate the fact that you can break it into literally a toolkit that you can use. So where most of the people say, well, I just do it unconsciously, I do it naturally. I'd say that's great. I mean, it's wonderful, right? But that's not good enough, because what happens when your unconscious communication is not working? You know, you need to be able to make a choice about how you get an outcome from a meeting, or make a choice about how you get an outcome from a relationship. That means you've got to switch it on, which means you've got to be aware of what you're doing. And that's what I teach you to do. The steps that make it work every time with everyone. And that's the key to being successful.
Yeah, absolutely. To be able to kind of codify that. I think I've tried to do a similar thing with the kind of acting process, and look at the way that actors work and engage, and what they do to influence an audience, and how you can apply that into a business context. One thing that you said there that really kind of took me back is, I used to direct shows for the QM2 cruise ship. So I've been around the kind of merchant navy, and we were putting actors on board those ships, and they would be on board for 3 or 4 months. And one of the things in the audition process was not just how talented were you as an actor. Obviously, we wanted the most talented people there to perform those roles to their best. But we also had to make sure that from a communications perspective, they could fit into that environment, that they could engage with the crew, that they could engage with the passengers, that they could work with each other. And I think, you know, from a business perspective, when we're thinking about building high performance teams, thinking about how the team communicate and how the team interact, and what those dynamics are, and what some of the kind of structures and frameworks are around that, really pays dividends, because it's so important to that kind of cohesive working environment.
Sorry, it's interesting you should say that, because one of the things I notice in a lot of organizations is that the bigger the organization, the more silos that there are.
Yeah.
So, you know, finance doesn't talk to sales, sales doesn't talk to marketing, marketing doesn't talk to whatever. And in professional practice is the same thing. You've got audit doesn't talk to insolvency and blah, blah, blah. And as far as I'm concerned, synergy is the essence of everything. Synergy means you're optimizing every capacity that you have within your organization. And where does synergy come from? In terms of humans, it's how do I connect with you? Do I involve you? Do I engage you? And that's fundamental communications. And if there aren't regular communications between the different departments, and I don't just mean at leaders level, and it doesn't even happen at that level in many cases, where there's ego, or where there's competition, or where there's concern, or where there's anxiety, or where there's brand building to the excess or to the exclusion of everybody else, that fundamentally sabotages the success of a sales team or any team, a finance team, a leadership team, a management team. So it's interesting you should say that. Of course, you're one of these very cushy Pazzi liners. I didn't have that experience. I would have loved it. I would have 6 months on that on my head, right? But I think that's a really, really, really interesting observation because I think, Dominic, what you put your finger on there is, yeah, you can be brilliant. It's what I was saying, you can be an expert in acting, but if you're not an influencer who can get on with other people, nobody's going to like you, trust you, care about you enough to have to listen to what you have to say. And that is exactly the same situation in sales and leadership today. You can be brilliant at what you do. You can be the best. I mean, short of just being a brain surgeon where I have to talk to you, right? There's other people I can talk to that I like and I will listen to. If you're not someone I can relate to, I don't care how good you are. And that's the key. I don't care how good you are. Yeah. I'm not prepared to listen. And that can be incredibly frustrating. If you think I have all the answers, but I'm not interested. Go away. Yeah. So that step to expert, it's not enough to be an expert anymore. You have to be an influencer. It's as simple as that. Absolutely. And if I may digress for just a moment, I talk about, since COVID, we've 4 new laws around sales, or for that matter, leadership, right? And I say, first law is nobody cares. Nobody cares about what you have to say. Nobody cares. So people are so absorbed in what they got to do. They're running twice as fast to stay where they were before COVID happened. They don't care about what you have to say until you make them care.
Yes.
Right? The second thing, attention is the new currency. Attention is everything. If you can't get someone's attention, you will not be able to do anything. And people talk about attention spans diminishing. That's not true. There's nothing wrong with our attention span. You're a former, maybe still an actor, so you're probably a film buff like myself. I sat through 3 hours of Oppenheimer recently, right? Yeah. And months before that, I sat through 3 hours of the Batman. If I'm interested, I can pay attention.
You'll stay,
Right? My problem's not attention. My problem is distraction. That's the problem. So attention's the new currency. That's law number 2. Law number 3, emotion wins attention.
Yeah.
So if I get emotion involved in the process of getting you to engage with me, I'm going to capture and hold your attention. I mean, there was some work done. I talk about this guy called Professor Zaltman at Harvard, who said 95% of all buying decisions are emotionally based.
Right.
That's enormous. And yet, if you look at all the messaging we use, the USPs and all that sort of stuff, they're all logical. They're all company-centric, none of which make it. You talk to any sales guy, they'll tell you, USPs are just like everybody else's. The only thing unique about USPs is nothing, right? Absolutely nothing, because they're exactly the same USPs your clients use. And then the 4th law is share of attention equals share of wallet, right? Or share of influence if you're a leader. So number 1, nobody cares. Number 2, attention is the new currency. Number 3, emotion wins attention. And number 4, share of attention equals share of influence or share of wallet. And that is fundamentally down to the fact that if you can't influence me, I'm not interested.
Yeah, I love that. Really good. Sorry to interrupt, but before we continue with the episode, I've got a favour to ask. I'm on a mission to get this podcast in the hands of as many people as possible. So if you found what you've heard so far valuable, please, please, please like, comment, rate and subscribe. These things make a huge difference to our reach. And if you're open to it, if you happen to know just one person, someone who, just like you, would benefit from listening to these conversations, then please share the podcast with them. Let's get on with it. Sean, take me back a little bit to leaving the Merchant Navy and going into IT and that first sales kind of gig. What was that like? And how did you get on? Were you a natural salesperson or did you have to work at it?
Well, first of all, let me be clear. Like everybody else, I never wanted to be a salesperson, right? I wanted to be a marketing person, right? I wanted to sip daiquiris on the beach while I came up with wonderful ideas. I never actually wanted to talk to anybody, right? And I always talk about selling as an accidental profession. I mean, if you talk to any professional salespeople, none of them ever chose to be when they were 7 years old, you asked me what was I going to be when I was 7 years old. The last thing that was on my mind was to be a salesperson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to be involved in sales of any kind. We wanted to be astronauts or engineers or whatever it was, like I said. And it's the same for everybody. Like literally selling is still an accidental profession. People fall into it. And you'll see all kinds of people in it. Engineers, doctors, nurses, scientists, everybody, right? Actors, right? Everybody's involved in it. So I would have to say my original intention was not to be a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess even though I consider myself a natural introvert, I like time on my own. When I'm interested in how I can help people. It's always been my thing. How can I help people? It's always been an attitude of service, right? And leadership is about service. Sales is about service. It's all about service. So I guess just my natural inclination and desire to find out, what sort of challenges you're having, what am I doing that I can help you with? It just led me to become very, very successful at sales.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had two things that worked for me. One, I was curious about their challenges. I wanted to find a solution for them if I wanted. Getting paid for that was kind of a benefit that came out of it. It was not my original thinking, although obviously goals came in and targets came in. All those things were important as well.
Yeah.
And I think it was just that attitude of service helped me to be really successful with people. And the tendency to focus on the person rather than the technology. So I was in the IT industry. I mean, I was there when they were moving from minis and mainframes to using, desktop computers. I mean, that's how old I am, 372, I think, something like that. And they just didn't want to know about desktops, right? They didn't want to know about that. And so and even the guys selling them didn't know anything about them. So we'd read the back of the brochure and we just go tell people about what was on the back of the brochure. You blinded them with science. Yeah. But my purpose was really to say what was the problem. Mm-hmm. I remember one specific issue which kind of there was a large government organization here I was dealing with, and I got to meet the buyer eventually. And that was back in the days when you could meet people as opposed to now.
Yeah, face to face, yeah.
And I was talking to him. He said, look, you're the third person from your company, and you've never been able to give anything we wanted, blah, blah, blah. And he was clearly, not happy. People hadn't really paid attention to him. They hadn't focused on him. And, you do what you can in those situations. Say, look, I can't speak for the guys who've spoken to you before, but I can't speak for me. Here's what's going to happen. You're only ever going to have to make one phone call if you ever have a need. And I personally will see that's done. And if it's not done by the company I work for, I'll find a company to do it for you. Mm-hmm. Or worse to that effect. And he sort of looked at me for a couple of seconds and said, okay, we'll give you a go. And we got a really large contract, continuous contract on the back of that. And that was not about the technical excellence of our technology or the quality of our brands or anything. That was just me being real with him, and saying, look, whatever it takes, I'm gonna make sure you're okay. And sometimes that's the most important thing you can say to somebody.
Absolutely, and that personal connection is so much more important than what's on the back of the brochure. I mean, what's on the back of the brochure has to be good, right? We're not talking about selling people duds here, but as you say, in the modern market, there's actually very little difference between most products and services. So it really is about that rapport and that level of trust. Your book, The Trusted Advisor, talks about the hybrid age and the AI age, and I'm kind of curious. We were just talking about the evolution of desktop computers, and here we are with robots walking among us. So
I might just correct you on that, Dominic. The Trusted Advisor is a book that came out about 30 years ago. My book is called The Highly Trusted Advisor.
Highly Trusted Advisor.
How to lead teams and win clients. I do differentiate between levels of trust in relationship, hence I call it a highly trusted advisor. So very briefly, if I may, like you probably have people that you like, and you trust, right? But you don't share everything about yourself with them, right? And then you have relationships with people where you have such a high degree of trust with them that there is no hesitation, no limitations, no restriction. You just put everything on the table and say, that's who I am, right? So there are levels of trust in relationships. And what I'm talking about is being a trusted advisor is good, but to be a highly trusted advisor where the client sees you as their go-to person because you are 100% present for them.
Yeah.
That's where we need to be today, particularly in a world where AI is starting to look after transactional elements and where we're operating and remotely and we're dealing with more two-dimensional environments of communications like we're doing here, as opposed to a three-dimensional communication where I've got all kinds of other stuff helping with building trust, such as breathing patterns, energy, all this other stuff. You don't have that necessarily on screen in this kind of situation. So you've got to be that much better in that situation.
Yeah. So given that and given how quickly things change, what do you think will be the kind of impact of AI on how we pitch and present in the next sort of 5 years?
I think AI, I mean, I use AI, I use ChatGPT, I use it's great to help you process thoughts quicker. I need to come up with a poll for something. I key it in, I get a poll in 30 seconds as opposed to, taking 30 minutes to dream something up on my own. That's great. I think there's a lot of hype around AI. I think there's a lot of concern about AI. I do think there are real issues around ethics of AI that needs to be reviewed, needs to be looked at, need to be considered. I think like the capacity for learning management systems to be able to just collate all this information, to deduce information from that and make it happen is hugely powerful. And it should be able to help us augment. So it'll be able to augment things like, I spoke at a medical conference last week and they were talking about taking a photograph. You take a photograph of a pimple you see in your body. You send it through. The doctor doesn't even look at it. The AI looks at it, compares it with a million other photographs, and comes back with a green, you're okay, yellow, you might need to see your doctor, red, get into hospital straight away. Like that's powerful stuff. I mean, when you can't even get an appointment with your doctor these days, that's exactly what AI should be used to do. It augments capability.
Yeah.
What AI cannot do currently is feel. Right. And at the end of the day, for a transactional price only type sale, sure, AI will do that. The bots will take your reservation and sound like a person on the restaurant. They were doing that 5 years ago. I heard a demonstration on that 5 years ago, which was amazing, right? What they will not do is when it comes to talking to somebody about making an investment that's going to directly impact on your career, your future, your business, or your success. I'm not going to talk to a bot because I want to see how that person responds when I'm asking the real questions that matter to me. And that's why for particularly high value sales, the personal relationship will always remain critical to the engagement until we're individually augmented by AI and we're half robot, in which case it won't matter anymore. But I really think that for quite some time to come, this capacity for imagination, for this collaboration, for synergy, for emotion, for this sense of trust, and particularly high trust. If I'm going to spend a significant amount of income, or if I'm going to look to invest in a relationship, it's going to come down to this kind of thing. This us having a conversation. You being able to read my body language. How congruent am I in my communication? All those millions of years of evolution that allow us to make threat assessments and decide what's safe and what's not safe, that operate without us even being aware of them. The discounting, the judgment element, the stereotyping, these are all good things because they keep us safe, and they have done for millions of years, or 250,000 years, you want to be very specific. They're not going to go away in 10 years.
Yeah.
They're not even going to go away in 30 years, right? I think they'll still remain a very, very strong part of service provision, and selling and leadership are part of service provision to people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love this concept of being that highly trusted advisor. And I think one of the things that I talk a lot about is, the importance of stepping into your audience's shoes and really kind of getting that understanding so that you can build rapport, so that you can understand their needs and offer them those solutions. I feel like that's very much in your ballpark too. So what advice would you give people listening to help them better understand their clients and prospects?
Well, there's so much in terms of psychology and tools available to be consciously become more aware of the kind of people you're dealing with. So you've got psychometric testing, you've got the 4-color quadrant systems, what type of personality you're dealing with, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, if it comes down to not having any of that or not being trained in any of that, what's the best thing you can do? The best thing you can do is learn to ask questions.
Yeah.
Questions are fundamental to success in sales. There is an old salesman's prayer, and there's a reason for it. It says, "Oh Lord, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Please help me to use them in that ratio." Right? Because, the stereotypical image is this, uber psychotic extroverted person who just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. And, that's fine. It's good. It's important you're able to get on with people. It's important you feel comfortable in yourself. But I always say introverts make the best salespeople. Because introverts make space for that other person to come to them. I think the most important thing in selling is to get the other person speaking.
Yeah.
And I always talk about starting off with what I call the values conversation. So, most of us will know by now, the last thing you do when you go into a meeting is ask a person, tell me about your business. You should know. You've got Google. You've got LinkedIn. You've got AI, right? You shouldn't be asking a person about their business anymore. But what you should be asking them about is something like, well, in terms of your business decisions around IT investment, what's going to be most important for you the next 12 months?
Mm-hmm.
What else is important? Anything else? If there was one more thing that might be important in that space, what might that be? So asking gentle questions that help them understand their own priorities around whatever problem they happen to be. I mean, I mentioned IT, it could be accounting, it could be investment, it could be whatever, right? But there's a set of language, I call it a values conversation. And values are critical to understand for a client. They're different for every decision maker. And they're huge things. They could be peace of mind, they could be security, they could be convenience, but they matter when it comes to people making a decision to buy because there's an emotional component. There are emotional triggers. I think what's most important when it comes to getting to know your customers, meet them at an emotional level where they feel comfortable, where they feel secure, where they feel engaged. And the best way to do that is ask a question that gets them talking for a couple of different reasons. 1, you're expressing interest. 2, you're not talking. 3, they are talking. And the person anyone is most comfortable with in their entire lives is themselves. So when they hear themselves doing most of the talking, they feel their threat assessment levels come down and down and down and down and down because they feel included. They feel that you're sympathetic. You feel that you're listening and you're guiding. You're not interrogating the questions. You're guiding the conversation. So I think, and questions need to be learned. I do a lot of work around questions where we talk about soft language. So using language like if and suppose and maybe, perhaps, and might and would, which makes things very, very plausible. Where you make suggestions rather than ask hard questions. Where we talk about, open and close questions, which many people are familiar with, but don't actually use effectively because there's certain ways to frame that, right? And you're probably familiar with that yourself, Donna. Tag questions, state and stall questions, answer assist questions, exploratory questions, convincer questions. There are different types of questions that have a different psychological impact on the person you're working with, the prospect, client, staff member, whatever. And you need to learn these things. You can't just trust it just because you've grown up that you know how to do this stuff. This is what I was saying earlier about, I kind of do all that stuff. No, you don't, because you just do it unconsciously and you hope it works. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It should work every time. Yeah. It is so hard to get a meeting with a decision maker in today's environment. You can't work on a 1 out of 4 ratio anymore. Yeah. You have got to educate yourself. You've got to learn the psychology. You've got to learn the influencing techniques. You've got to learn the tools to make sure it's 2 out of 4 or 3 out of 4, because it's so hard to get those 4 in the first place. So it's not and you know what's amazing? I read something recently in Top Sales Magazine, which is something that I get, that in the United States, 90% of training is product training. 90% of training is look, there's a need for understanding your product. But if only 10% of your training is on your people skills, you are losing a lot of business. Yeah. You said it yourself. Of course, your stuff has to be good. You have to understand you have to be an expert. But if you're not an influencer, you're done. right? And yet 90% of the training in the States is technical training. And it's the same for accountants and lawyers and professionals and experts. And yet doctors, and yet all these people, their fundamental capability, you said it yourself, life's a pitch. Everything is about getting somebody on board with you at some point, whether you're a leader or a salesperson. That's about how well you can influence. That's about how well you can communicate. And it's just not good enough to rely on what you know, because what you know is not enough.
Yeah.
You've got to invest in learning.
And it's fascinating when you look at kind of, wider high performance space, whether it's, sports or musicians or actors, the ratio of time, and the military, the ratio of time spent prepping off the field versus the ratio of time spent on the field. It's like, very conservatively, it's 80% preparation for 20% activation. And yet in business, I don't think we do think like that. And we look at the child who was a natural runner and go, okay, without a coach and without a decent pair of trainers and without any work on the mindset, you'll be an Olympian. It's like, no, you won't. You're going to have to put in some hard miles to be able to get there. And it's not just a given that because you show some sort of propensity to something that you will achieve high performance in that space.
It's absolutely true. I can completely agree with you. I mean, it is amazing the level of, if we just take sales, for example, right? Sales, if you talked about the military, to use the special forces analogy, right? Sales is the tip of the spear. They make the breach, and it's through the breach everything else comes in, right? Until you make that breach, there's no need for finance, no need for marketing, no need for HR, no need for leadership, no need for production, no need for manufacturing. And yet, sales is constantly devalued in the process of things. It's the most is demanded from it, and the least is invested in it. And I have never understood that, how the most can be demanded of sales. And there's an expectation, well, look, it's just talking to people. No. It's a psychology, it's influence, it's a discipline. It is the first business discipline, because without it, there's no need for anything else, right? And how blunt so many spears are out there in businesses because they refuse to invest in the tip of that spear. They just don't train their people. And you know who the worst people are in that? The sales leaders themselves. Because they don't want to be exposed as being vulnerable. Whereas the reality is, I mean, I studied martial arts for many years. I studied martial arts 20 odd years. I have a 4th degree black belt in martial arts. You got to take a bit of a pummeling before you learn how to avoid the pummeling, right? I mean, I spent 2 years getting beaten black and blue. I would take my shirt off and my entire body would be black and blue from being beaten, right? And then miraculously 2 years later, I took it off one night, no marks, right?
Yeah.
But it was because I learned unconsciously. I didn't have to think anymore how to move and to respond, and that's the thing with sales. In many cases, the leaders are afraid to expose themselves. What I'm saying is, actively seek out where the gaps are and plug them.
Yeah.
Sharpen that spear. Make your people the best they can be, because if you do that, then that reflects well on you as a leader. And that's the key.
Absolutely. You've actually created this sales enablement app called Sellingis.Life. So what do you see when people kind of get into that platform and start to engage? What are the areas that they seem to want to focus on most? What are the kind of gaps that you're really plugging?
I think really the app is called Sellingis.Life because life is selling. Pure and simple. That's what it's all about. We talked about that earlier. If you've ever gone on a date, it was a sale. You let your parents stay up late. Hence, Sellingis.Life. That it should be something that's just innate to us, but we have to learn it too. The other aspect of it. The reason I'm setting up the app, or it's only really just getting off the ground now, is twofold. One, you can join as an individual. So if you're a professional needs to sell, selling is not your thing. It's ideal for that. But really, where it's focused at the moment is enabling sales managers to enable their teams. So we have a team license facility whereby, let's say you have a team of 10 people or 20 people or 30 people. What I'm looking to do is educate the sales manager to be able
Yeah.
to train, coach, and develop his team. They can't do that normally because they might have a target on their own back, or they just don't have the time, or they just, in most cases, don't have the skill sets. You and I both know a sales manager who's a really good sales guy got promoted. And a sales manager, a sales director is a guy in a couple of years who got promoted to sales director. Because what do we want to do when we're salespeople? We want to get some kudos. We want to get some status. How do we do that? We become a director. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because we still have this primitive concept that selling has no value because of this old stereotypical concept of the commercial sales guy, which is so dead now, but it's still buried into our psyche. So we look to move up the ladder as quickly as possible. But we don't necessarily carry leadership skills with us when we do. Now, most people don't want to say this. They'll probably hate me for saying it, but it's true. So the purpose of Sellingis.Life is to provide a three-stage element. One, provide coaching for the sales manager as part of a group of peers to help them on a weekly basis with their leadership challenges, how they drive their team, focus, motivational challenges. And it's all enabled with video and audio and all kinds of stuff. So there's live weekly coaching for them as part of a peer group. There's live weekly coaching for their team where we deal with any challenges that their teams have. And that's where they get to meet their peers. But then, so that's the community piece where they can post and engage. And that's the coaching piece. There's a community piece where they can post threads, ask questions, engage with each other. And then there's the content piece, which is a detailed content library of video and audio, which is available 24/7 on desktop or laptop. So a lot of learning is done when people are on their off time, when they're traveling on planes, whatever. So it's important to have it available on your mobile device. Mm-hmm. So between coaching the leaders, coaching the teams, video enabling their training, and providing a community where they can connect and network with peers, it's a tool to allow sales leader, sales director, sales manager to really empower themselves, him, her, or they, to be able to really feel confident and have a guide and a direction to optimize their teams. Yeah. And not to have to rely all the time on external trainers. Now, it's important to bring external trainers in because a live experience is hugely valuable to a team. No question about that. But if you can empower your leaders to be able to do that with your teams, then how you get optimized happens a lot quicker, and it happens over a longer period. And it means that, I talked about it's not enough to close 1 and 4 anymore. You're going to be closing 2 and 3 out of 4 because it's so hard to get to 4. Getting in front of decision makers today is harder than it's ever been. You can't afford to lose those opportunities, which means you've got to use everything to do that. And the Sellingis.Life concept is really just an enablement tool to help them be able to do that easily and effortlessly, with as much support as possible. It's a way of being of service to the profession, if you will. That's probably the best way to put that.
I love it. I think that continuous development, that continuous improvement is so important, rather than it just being that kind of one-off hit. Sean, it's been amazing talking to you. I could chat stuff like this all day, but I've got a final question for you. If you could go back and give that young man who couldn't even fix his bicycle tire one piece of advice.
He wanted to fix his bicycle. He was a lazy son.
All right, so go back and give him one piece of advice. What would it be?
I could be facetious and say, buy Google. Do you know what? I got to be honest. It's been a hell of a ride so far. I've sailed the 7 oceans. I've trained as an engineer. I've spoken all over the world as an international sales conference speaker. I've met with some amazing people in my career. I've coached some fantastic, worked with some amazing companies. It's kind of hard. I'd hate to go back and sort of give advice because he'd miss all the adventure that lays out there, the good and the bad. I wouldn't even take the bad experiences from it, because that's what builds character. That's what builds discipline. That's what builds strength. And yeah, it's frustrating and it's heartbreaking and it's painful and it's anxious. But you know what? That's life. And I think part of the problem that we have today is we try and shield people from the vicissitudes of life. There's no value in being shielded from adversity. There's no value in being shielded from anxiety. There's no value in being causative. It's you've got to become strong. And by strong, I don't mean hard. I mean, a strong man is a man who's capable of caring for himself, more importantly, caring for others. but it also means you're empathetic, you're intuitive, you're aware, you're sensitive, and you learn these things from experience. So I know it sounds strange, but I'd probably just sit back and watch them grow up again, you know?
Awesome. Sean, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure, Dominic. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It will take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.